Hello, my good people. Hello, my good fans. Hello, my good people. Can I tell you who I am? Hello, good people. Hello, my fans. Hello, my family. Hello, my friends. I hope everybody is well today. Are you a cowboy or are you a pirate? Drop it in the comments below. Alright guys, time to lay off the nitrous a little bit and get to business, huh? Remember back in 07 when you could get Tony Hawk skateboarding shoes for 20 bucks, huh? New editions as well. Alright, let's tune it back to 97.7 and let's get rockin'. This is the second video in a series looking at both existential horror as a concept as well as comparing the lives and works of two amazing authors, H.P. Lovecraft and Jorge Luis Borges. There's two things I want to cover in this video. First, who the heck was this guy? Tall, pale, lanky, awkward king, H.P. Lovecraft. Racist king H.P. At least he was socialist by the end of his life. Jeez. In my original script, I didn't allow much time for discussing Lovecraft's interesting politics and some of his choice views. But now that I'm setting aside a whole video, the story may be a little different. The second thing I want to fit in here is the first story we'll be looking at. How exciting. Borges' story, There Are More Things, a direct tribute to the works of H.P. Lovecraft. But, Owen, I can hear you guys saying, why would we read another guy's story after learning about H.P. Lovecraft, man? I don't know, maybe it's a bad idea, but a large driver of my interest in making this is a root of my frustration I was expressing last video about Lovecraftian media and how people try to mimic his style and do kind of bad or ignore the cool parts of his stories that I like. So I was presented an opportunity on a golden plate when I came across this story. The two authors I was already planning on comparing, and then there's a whole story already by one of them trying to mimic the other one's style. So it provides a jumping off point for both Lovecraft and Borges, as well as shows in a short story very elementary factors of a Lovecraft story and what imitators latch onto. We'll examine what we like about the story and what we think could have been done a little bit better. In this video, we'll also start to pull out some of the subgenres of horror we'll be talking about. These are just fun plot elements that I think birthed their own sort of legacy, from Freddy Krueger to The Fifth Element. So without further ado, let's examine this ghoulish freak. Oh yeah. Howard Phillips Lovecraft lived 1890 to 1937, born in Rhode Island. I just read his biography and it's pretty fucked up, man. There's so many things about him that are just humorously indicative of, living in 1900. But it's also just so tragic, which is living in 1900. It's not hard to see why asylums, grand New England buildings, and darkly schizophrenic visions pepper his pages. As a child, his father was institutionalized in an asylum when he was like 5. Sorry, bro. Hey, sorry, little bro. Gotta take your dad away to the asylum. Sorry, bro. And then his dad died a few years later in the asylum. First one down. So then, he's kind of in and out of school his whole childhood with general mentally ill child business, touchy. He's real touchy. Oh, he's a sensitive boy. You know how it goes. Of course, without his father, he has no father. Of course, without his father, they have to move in with his mother's family, which he really likes. They have a really good time for a couple of years until a catastrophic accident causes his grandfather's business to go bankrupt, and then his grandfather dies of a stroke because of the financial stress. And what are you gonna do? That's the 1900s, bro. Tragedy happens, you might just die of feeling bad about it. So H.P. He went to high school, but he never graduated because he had a breakdown so intense he never returned. It's crazy how mental health was respected. You could take a bunch of time off for it, but it also just wasn't understood at all. And if you pissed off the wrong guy, then you'll just go get fucking lobotomized. So double-edged sword. And then as an adult, his mom goes crazy as well. She has visions of pale monsters sprinting towards her from corners and forgets where she is all the time. You and me both, sister. You know what I'm saying? Come on, fellas. She is also institutionalized and dies in the asylum. It starts to make some more sense when you look into all this. So Lovecraft, he's not a complete loner. He somehow manages to hook a rich widow, the weirdo, stick-straight racist dweeb that he was. They met at a journalism convention, and it seems like for a good couple years she was a really good influence on our young author. He's like maybe 31. She feeds him enough that he's like 200 pounds, big HP. She moves him to Brooklyn, and for a bit they seem to be pretty happy and inspired by the city. But some amount of time later, though, can anybody guess what's gonna happen? Rich wife who runs the business, everything's going well, but it's the 20th century, what's gonna happen? Bam, business failure, she goes bankrupt, big surprise. So they have to move out of New York and go to Cleveland. And H.P. Lovecraft just hates it, and he totally gets freaked out by humanity in big cities. And this is when we get a lot of stuff. His most famous stories, images of dark, forgotten cities, colossal entities proving how puny humanity is. Well, thanks for that, Cleveland. So horrific that you inspired fucking Rats in the Walls by H.P. Lovecraft. So she travels constantly, his wife, and he moves back to Rhode Island. This part makes me really sad. They eventually agree to a consensual divorce over letters, because they haven't lived together for years at this point. She remarries 3 years later, but the copy that Lovecraft had of the divorce agreement he never actually signed. It had no legal bearing. It just made me sad. Maybe he just forgot, but I just picture a golden era with a plump wife in the big city, and he's like, of course I'll sign the divorce papers. It's been years since we've seen each other. But he's just like, sorry, bruh. So what I took from reading this is an almost comical, depressing past story, like Heinz Doofenshmirtz, and with just that sickly late 19th century family vibe going on. But it wasn't just Lovecraft's personal and family life that were depressing. His writings while he was alive got him very little, financially at least. He found a small group of like-minded authors and friends and achieved some sort of position on a board of writers. But he struggled with money his whole life. Constant rejections from magazines and publications. Small payouts for what was accepted. Lovecraft took criticism terribly, privately at least. The man was basically a shut-in. A sickly shut-in child with an institutionalized father. A doted-on teenage mommy's boy who breaks down so hard he never finishes high school. And a meek ex-lover wasting away near his childhood home until his incredibly painful death of a tumor in the small intestine. It's not hard to see why he thought of the horrors that he did. Nervous anxiety plagued him. Masses of humanity and grand structures had a large presence in the fear of his mind. Very relatable. He was a very working class, financially stressed man with general mental unwellness who died painfully of a tumor in his small intestine at 47. This will be interesting when we compare Borges. So that's very much the sad, bare-bone details of his life. But reading his bio really does show this weird personality that still comes through. I don't think it's a good one, but he definitely was an infuriating Woodrow Wilson type racist. He was a century ahead of his time and has major Reddit vibes when it comes to religion. He was a scientifically awakened atheist by the age of 8, constantly dunking on his mom that God can't be real. In high school, he wrote racist poetry. What more do you need to hear, He was an egotistic, arrogantly scholastic, grade nerd mixed with a good bit of drama kid DNA. He'd engage in months-long debates in his local magazine, with both debaters writing their sides exclusively as poetry. After leaving school, he was appointed president of the United Amateur Press Association. And you know what he did with this power? He advocated fiercely to change standards to fit archaic English use, saying our Anglo roots needed to be pulled back up from the weeds of multicultural America. An Anglophile, xenophobic man to the core. The Old English stuff was mostly what I wanted to cover there, as well as the deeply ingrained social Darwinism. But again, by the end of his life, he realized that capitalism screwed everyone in the Great Depression and became a socialist. More like a Vanguard commie, but, you know, who's surprised by that? Dude was a freak, but he showed this weird growth. Clearly he had some weird thoughts going on up there. Well, alright, that's a lot of info about one lanky dude. That certainly gives us some more light. A hard life, early 1900s xenophobic American, and lots of death, tragedy, and just fucked up sanity losing from everybody around him his whole life. Not super hard to see the jump he'd make to writing this shit. So, as I mentioned in the intro, we're going to look at Borges' version of a Lovecraft story, to look at what he uses to get his effect. Since we're going to be looking at a few more pieces of media that owe their existence to Lovecraft, this will serve as a nice short story to take a blueprint from. It'll also give us an early example of some very common pitfalls that writers have with Lovecraftian/existential horror. There are more things. In this tale, we follow a late university student studying at the University of Texas. Classic university student protagonist, of course. We learn immediately that his uncle has died of an aneurysm on the remote frontier of South America. Something we got in common. Yeah, tick another one off the list. We got a dead relative, an uncle nonetheless. We're told some strange things about the dead man, and in the first paragraph we have a familial backstory involving intellectual conversation with our young protagonist. Immediately we have many mental and reality questioning sorts of ideas being fired off like 1, 2, 3, man. We got some Berkeleyan idealism, bitch. We got some Eliadic paradoxes, bitch. The important concepts that I latch on to them talking about are concerning shapes and spatial dimensions. The most important part of our opening flashback paragraph for our purposes is the end. Years later, he lent me Hinton's treatises, which attempted to prove the reality of a fourth dimension in space, a dimension the reader is encouraged to intuit by means of complicated exercises with colored cubes. I shall never forget the prisms and pyramids we erected on the floor of his study. This detail offers a slight foreshadow for the story, and I almost wish Borges had gone that way, but alas. I mostly pointed out because it is a theme of this series, and we will come back to that more later. Back to the plot. The uncle moved to a rural town, but still fairly close to Buenos Aires. He commissioned his friend to build him a house, but when he passed away, a Jewish foreigner named Max Pretorius purchased the property. He attempted to hire the same architect to make changes to the manor, but the man refused, calling it a monstrosity. Interestingly, just before revealing this detail, the man told a story about a mayor of the town Turdera, asking him to draw up plans for a Catholic chapel. No, I told them, I am a servant of the Lord, and I cannot commit the abomination of erecting altars for the worship of idols. Providing, one, an interesting implied connection that the building Pretorius wanted to erect was possibly some sort of religious shrine of worship to an unknown entity, and two, a common subject Borges likes to talk about that provides an interesting undercurrent to this story, but is no means the main or even supporting element. This will also be a theme of the series, like the shapes from the first paragraph. On his return trip to his abode from seeing the architect, an old friend approaches our protagonist, tells him about a spook he just received. He said that he's a real tough guy, but he saw something last night that even made him freaked out. The next day, he sees a carpenter who Pretorius managed to successfully hire for help in renovating his uncle's home. The man says, as you'd expect, that the customer is always right, but Signor Pretorius was not quite right. Time passes and our young student can't get these memories out of his head and takes a walk past the house at night, thinking he could hear moaning or seeing a very white light. Finally, out on a walk, a violent storm pushes him to enter his uncle's old house, whose door stands ajar, beckoning our man in. Inside, he doesn't quite understand what lies in front of him. The floor is ripped up, dirty and grassy, and the walls have been torn down to make one large cavernous room. The furniture is scattered about, yet changed into different objects he doesn't know how to make sense of. I will not attempt to describe them, because in spite of the pitiless white light I am not certain I actually saw them. Let me explain. In order truly to see a thing, one must first understand it. An armchair implies the human body, its joints and members. Scissors, the act of cutting. What can be told from a lamp or an automobile? The savage cannot really perceive the missionary's Bible. The passenger does not see the same ship's rigging as the crew. If we truly saw the universe, perhaps we would understand it. He sees a ladder and feels relief as it is the only object in sight that implies a human user. He ascends and finds what seems to be a creature's abode, with a U-shaped piece of furniture like an operating table, very high with circular openings at the extremes. He gathers the creature must look something like this and thinks of Amphisbaena, a mythological serpent with a head on both ends of its body, and it apparently eats ants. An interesting tidbit, he describes his mental connection for this thought, whose monstrous anatomy was revealed obliquely by this object in much the way the anatomy of an animal or a god may be known by the shadow it casts. Another interesting throw-in of Mr. God. The story wraps up by the protagonist hearing the creature approaching just as he gets down the ladder. Something heavy and slow and plural. Curiosity got the better of fear, and I did not close my eyes. Alright, that's the end. A short little tale with a wide-eyed jump of an end. Let's talk about it. I'm going to be talking about Borges himself later in the series, so we're getting an early glimpse at his writing, and it offers another author's interpretation on Lovecraft's work, an author of similar themed nature. And it was written in 1975, well before many popular notions of Lovecraft and his work existed. So we get a good look at some components that are key, elements that we like, little crumbs of some themes we'll be talking about, and then a little critique of where I would have liked it to go. Let's get crazy. So, to start, I'm going to point out a few things that I just kind of noticed as I went along, and it'll be like a good little numbered list of some cliches. So we've got the protagonist is a student, he's got a relative who's died, his relative dies in a remote location, the protagonist must investigate a leftover estate, it's a family estate, there's the fourth dimension involved, it's got funny shapes, it deals with architecture, something that Lovecraft loves to focus on. There's kind of a paper trail, chain of people, connections going through. That's a pretty common sort of plot device. There's very trailing narration, kind of 1800s Matt Smith, Doctor Who sort of vibe. There are such reports as the reader may imagine incited quite a bit of controversy into the local town. Yes, indeed. You know, that's kind of how I read it. It deals with an abomination. It's got casual racism. It deals with a freaky dream. It's got physical evidence of superhuman environment manipulation. Chaos. Alien. Incomprehensible. You never see the monster. And it's got a connection to mythology or some sort of world culture, however fleeting or tenuous. So those are in the same general story beats as the story goes. It's interesting to think of where to draw the line of what to call the Lovecraft trope and what would just be a normal horror story sort of trope. I think I did a fair job at picking them out. The main thing guiding my hand when reading this story is the intangible feeling of mixing all these weird things together. It feels intelligent, the background world lush with details, and extended relations and fields of study and universities. You can see the sort of Twilight Zone-ness of it. I want to take you to a world where dreams don't make sense. A world where a university professor doesn't study science, but the mystical. You know, something like that. Matter-of-fact narration and a look at a wild world. This story hits on a few different types of subject, which we may call types of horror in certain instances, that are fairly unique to existential horror and H.P. Lovecraft to some extent. We get a look at suggestive elements with shapes, geometry and weird polygons being the gateways to understanding different dimensions. Another major subject of horror present in this one is some sort of religious freakyisms. I feel like this is generally most powerful as a scene dressing, as set dressing, as the horrific reveal rarely is. The hideous creature who killed my family, this solitary community of maybe 100 people worship it as a god in some sort of hideous cult. Ah! No, it's not the reveal, it's not the thing. It's just something that leads you there, generally. In this story, we get suggestions that perhaps it is relatable in some way to an altar for idols. This is pretty common in many horror tales, as well as ones that aren't nearly as out there. There's something alien, something from the sky, something otherworldly. A cult around anything automatically gives it mystery, plus a million aura. Imagine before you meet me, you just know me as the Red One, represented as a finger-painted red eye that made you buzz when you look at it. I could still just be a dinkwad, but because you know me as the Red One, and my symbol makes you buzz, you think I'm a terrifying god, which maybe I am if my symbol makes you buzz, but it's the hook, the terrifying power that the creature holds is almost godly. And you don't even know what it is yet, or what it could possibly be. You just know that these people think it's a god. Oh my god. We get a couple others, but mostly as even more fleeting mentions than those two. Our main man has a dream. Dreams are huge for these guys, built-in human function that already makes you scared of forbidden knowledge. You already have a dream that makes you think of literary symbols. It's built into our brains. This one in the story is quite passing, and I'm not sure what it means at all. There's something about a minotaur that looks more like a buffalo than a bull, and his human body laying on the ground and dreaming. I don't know. That's Borges shit. We'll get into that in a couple videos. And then time also gets a short paragraph, but this one entirely worthless to the story in my estimation. He's just kind of like, time is the greatest mystery, but such profound thoughts don't do me any good right now, that's for sure. It's like, okay, bro. He almost knew what I was doing and decided to throw it in as many fleeting existential horror elements as possible. So, thanks, I guess. Yet, even with mentions of all these cool, strange elements that give us a lot of Lovecraft's best stories, the poor ending of this story also provides a poetic example of one of the worst and most familiar pitfalls that an existential horror story falls into. The terrible, terrible ending. I saw the creature, and it was just so weird. I don't even know what it was like, man. Jeez, it really makes you think about the universe. You can't even think about how crazy it is, man. Or, of course, they're about to see it, and then it ends, or whatever. Same business. This Borges ending also just calls to mind pulpy sci-fi, zines in H.P. Lovecraft's time, cheesy black and white movies a couple decades after that, So all in all, I don't think There Are More Things is anything special, but it gives us a very early example of a dissection of Lovecraft material. This was released in 1975, so I figure the only media he really could have seen of H.P. Lovecraft was the 1970 movie The Dunwich Horror, which is laughably preposterous and frankly terrible. We'll talk about that next video some. So even though our Borges story didn't stick the landing and struggled through some details, it's a fun and valiant attempt at a transiently Lovecraftian story. The really before Lovecraft existed as a genre. So it's kind of cool to see somebody break it down. Next episode will apply some of the same sort of techniques to some of my favorite Lovecraft movies and media, and see which ones come through with a confident vision and finish strong. So, thanks for tuning in. Till next time, my students, my world, the prettiest girl, the one at the ball I wanna take to my mall. The mall of my heart, would you be a part of it? My pretty dear, could I show you part of it? Yes, my heart heart, a part of my beautiful heart for you, for you, for you. Oh yes, I'll take the chance, I'll take the chance and ask you for a dance, my beautiful sweet, my beautiful girl. Won't you take me to the ball this year? Lend an ear to a friend for a chance at some love.